In December of 1952, a thick fog descended on London. It wasn't ordinary fog. It was a mix of cold air, coal smoke, and industrial emissions that got trapped over the city for 5 days. People coughed. Hospitals overflowed. Visibility dropped to less than a meter. Trains, buses, and shows were cancelled. Thieves had free rein because the police couldn't see anything. When the fog lifted, the government counted the dead. The initial figure was 4,000. Later investigations raised it to 12,000. 12,000 people dead from breathing. The factories emitting those gases didn't pay for the harm they caused. The households burning cheap coal didn't compensate their neighbors for the smoke. The market worked perfectly for the producers and consumers of coal. But it didn't include in the bill those who died from breathing it. This is a market failure. And understanding what it is, why it happens, and what can be done about it is one of the central themes of microeconomics. In the 2 previous episodes, we've seen how consumers decide and how firms think. In an ideal world, those individual decisions, coordinated by prices, would lead to an optimal result for society. Every resource would go where it generates the most value. But the world isn't ideal. And today we're going to see when and why markets fail. For that, we first need a benchmark, a way to measure whether a market is working well or not. In 1896, an Italian economist and engineer named Vilfredo Pareto formulated an idea that seems simple but changed the way we think about efficiency. Pareto said that a situation is efficient when it's not possible to improve anyone's situation without making someone else worse off. That's it. It doesn't say the situation is fair. It doesn't say it's good. It only says you can't make one person better off without hurting another. If that seems like a modest definition, it's because it is. And that modesty is its strength. Think of an example. There's a pie and 2 people. If one has the entire pie and the other has nothing, is it Pareto efficient? Yes. Because to give a piece to the second person, you'd have to take it from the first. The distribution is obscenely unequal, but technically it's efficient. And there's the lesson. Pareto efficiency doesn't guarantee fairness. It only guarantees there's no waste. That we're not leaving gains on the table. A Pareto improvement, on the other hand, is a change that makes at least one person better off without making anyone worse off. If we can find a possible Pareto improvement and we're not applying it, there's inefficiency. There's waste. Perfectly competitive markets, in theory, lead to Pareto efficient outcomes. Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu proved this formally in the 1950s. It's one of the most important results in theoretical economics. But the conditions required are so strict that, in practice, they're almost never met. And when they're not met, we have a market failure. A market failure occurs when the market, left to function freely, doesn't produce an efficient result. When prices don't reflect all costs or all benefits. When resources don't go where they generate the most value. Arthur Cecil Pigou, a Cambridge economist, did the most to formalize this idea. In 1920 he published The Economics of Welfare, a book that identified situations where private interest and public interest diverge. Pigou observed something that seems obvious but that nobody had articulated so clearly. Sometimes, when a firm or a consumer makes a decision that benefits them, that decision imposes costs on third parties who didn't participate in the transaction. And because those costs don't appear in the price, the market ignores them. The London factory burning coal produced cheap electricity. The price of that electricity reflected the cost of coal, workers, machinery. But it didn't reflect the cost of respiratory diseases, premature deaths, toxic fog. Those costs were real, but someone else was paying them. The market didn't fail because it was stupid. It failed because it lacked information. Because prices weren't telling the whole story. Economists identify 4 main types of market failure. The first is externalities. Costs or benefits affecting people who don't participate in the transaction. The factory that pollutes. The neighbor practicing music at 3 in the morning. The firm that invests in research and creates knowledge that benefits everyone. The second is public goods. Goods that can't be divided or excluded. National defense protects everyone, whether they pay taxes or not. A lighthouse guides all ships, not just those paying a toll. If you can't exclude anyone, how do you fund it? The third is market power. When a firm or a small group dominates the market, it can set prices above marginal cost. It produces less than what's efficient and charges more than what's fair. The result is a loss of efficiency that economists call deadweight loss. And the fourth is asymmetric information. When one party in a transaction knows more than the other. The used car seller who knows the defects the buyer can't see. The insurer who can't tell high-risk clients from low-risk ones. Each of these failures has distinct characteristics, distinct solutions, and deep debates about the best way to address them. We'll devote the next episodes to exploring them one by one. But first, a fundamental question. If the market fails, who fixes it? Pigou had a clear answer: the government. If a factory pollutes and the market doesn't capture that cost, the government should impose a tax equal to the damage the pollution causes. That way the price would reflect the real cost, and the market would correct itself. It's called a Pigouvian tax, and it's one of the most elegant tools in economics. But 40 years later, another economist offered a very different answer. In 1960, Ronald Coase published an article titled The Problem of Social Cost. And his argument was devastating. Coase said that if property rights are well defined and the parties can negotiate without costs, they'll solve the problem themselves, without any need for the government. Imagine a factory next to a river. The factory pollutes. Fishermen lose income. Pigou would say, tax the factory. Coase would say, let them negotiate. If the fishermen have the right to a clean river, the factory will pay them for the right to pollute, and will only pollute if the benefit exceeds what it has to pay. If the factory has the right to use the river, the fishermen will pay it to reduce pollution, and it will reduce if the compensation exceeds its profit. In both cases, the result is efficient, without government intervention. The problem is that the Coase theorem requires conditions that are rarely met in reality. Negotiating has costs. The affected parties can number in the millions. Property rights aren't always clear. When 12,000 Londoners die from fog, who negotiates with whom? And there's a third voice in this debate. James Buchanan and the Public Choice School argued that the government also fails. Politicians have their own interests. Bureaucrats maximize their budgets. Lobby groups capture the regulator. The government isn't a benevolent planner. It's a set of people with their own incentives. So we have three positions. Pigou, the government corrects market failures. Coase, private negotiation can solve them without government. Buchanan, be careful, because the government fails too. The truth probably includes all three. And the best solution depends on the specific case. Market failures aren't theoretical curiosities. They're the reason environmental regulation, public healthcare, compulsory education, and antitrust laws exist. Every time a government decides to intervene in a market, it's implicitly or explicitly saying, the market alone doesn't produce an acceptable result here. And every time someone argues the government should step back and let the market work, they're saying, the intervention causes more harm than the failure it's trying to correct. This debate sits at the heart of nearly every political discussion about economics. Public or private healthcare. Environmental regulation or business freedom. Price controls or free markets. All these discussions are, at bottom, discussions about market failures and government failures. London's Great Fog was resolved with regulation. Parliament passed the Clean Air Act in 1956, banning the burning of certain fuels in urban areas. Deaths from pollution dropped dramatically. But regulation isn't free. It has costs. It has side effects. And sometimes it creates new problems. The question is never whether markets fail, because they do. The question is whether the alternative is better. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, Pareto efficiency is the benchmark. A situation is efficient when you can't improve anyone's lot without worsening someone else's. Competitive markets tend toward Pareto efficiency, but only under very strict conditions. Second, there are 4 types of market failure: externalities, public goods, market power, and asymmetric information. In all cases, the market doesn't capture all costs or benefits, and the result is inefficient. Third, the debate over how to correct market failures has 3 major voices. Pigou says the government must intervene with taxes and regulation. Coase says private negotiation can solve the problem. Buchanan warns that the government also fails. The best answer depends on the context. We've said that one of the most common forms of market failure is externalities. Costs that prices don't capture. Damage that someone pays for but nobody charges. Next time we're going to look at externalities up close. And we'll start with the simplest of all, a factory that pollutes the river of the town next door. And the uncomfortable question of who should pay for the cleanup. That's next time.